Welcome to week 4. And this week we're going to talk about something that I'm calling the paradox called fake news. The case that the term fake news is an oxymoron should not be surprising to us. An oxymoron, as we know, is a self-contradictory combination of words. Hot ice might be one. And similarly, fake news, meaning if it's fake, it can't be news, right? Because news by definition comprises verified information. And this is a simple and clever use of words to connote that there is something that's real versus something that's unreal. And the simplest form of reality is a fact. That's the presumption we're making in fake news, in the term fake news. So if a car passes by my house, I can't dispute that it did. If it didn't, and I claim that it did, that's not factual. But if fake news were that simple, would we really need a whole movement called media literacy? So in this insightful book called How Real is Real, Confusion, Disinformation, Communication, that's the name of the book, written in 1976 by author Paul Watzlawick. Watzlawick brings up some delightful instances of paradoxes that we may encounter. And a paradox, as we know, is a self-contradiction, like an oxymoron. Like, no generalization is completely true, including this one. That's a paradox, right? But in the book, Watzlawick narrates a paradoxical situation where an imaginary thing called a being, like Big Brother, has this reputation of predicting human choices with almost total accuracy. So you know that being has often correctly predicted your choices. And as far as you've known or heard, being has never made an inaccurate prediction about your choices or others' choices. Now, being shows you two boxes. Explains that box 1 contains $1,000. Box 2 contains either $1 million or it contains nothing. There is nothing preventing you from going straight to box 2. Right? Like, that would be the logical thing to do. So box 2 may or may not contain $1 million. So where's the problem, you may ask? Isn't that obvious that we can just walk away with at least $1,000? So we should definitely open box 1 first. Well, that's not what happened when Robert Nozick, who's a scholar who wrote an article about this, urged academics and students and so forth. Well, not students. He asked academics to test this on their students. Rather than go with an argument, you must conclusively prove that the other side is absurd. That's the way to establish this choice. Now, apparently nobody has been ever able to do that, and well, hadn't been until that point. And the very clear correlation with this is that establishment of absurdity of an argument before you can believe the other side. Now, let me explain my claim, that fake news is a paradox. I made that claim ahead of this example that I gave you. So fake news is an ironic play on words, as I mentioned before, to indicate that what's real is not real. But then fake news occurs all the time. News by definition is information. Information by definition is real, but people consume fake news as though it were news. That's the assumption we're making. The consumer is interested in consuming this, but the paradox lies in the fact that the consumer may or may not believe in its veracity. A piece of fake news can walk and talk like news. Even if the consumer does not believe in the veracity, they may want to seek its validation and therefore share it. But with a validation, it becomes more believable. And so the chain continues. I urge you to watch, when you watch the short BBC videos, the two videos actually, one features BBC, that are called Dow Chemicals 1 and 2 in this week's viewing list. You will see how the broadcast network presumably takes its work more seriously than any other goofdom. So these days, we also distinguish between disinformation and misinformation. Now, basically, disinfo is deliberate, misinfo is just an error. To a consumer, really, this distinction doesn't matter much. And so I see the distinction as somewhat artificial. However, at the production level, what is consumed remains consumed, so that's a given. But at the production level, it does matter. Conspiracy theories are an example of disinformation because they remain largely unscrutinized by some community, like a scientific community or a body of reviewers or scholars. So the idea that a cabal is running the world, for example, is an attractive alternative theory that explains most of the problems of the world. Doesn't solve the problems, but it explains them. Yet the community which this theory holds responsible will not agree. Like these very communities that are supposed to form the cabal obviously will not agree, right? So this is the stage of media literacy that we are in, where we cannot agree whether it matters or not, whether it matters whether conspiracy theories are right or wrong, whether it should matter that a thoroughly scrutinized community agrees with them or not. So this agreement is where we're a little stuck. Media literacy cannot provide these answers, but can tell you to think about the deeper contradictions within the ways in which we recognize our world. So fake news came into vogue only early this century, like, we use it like a buzzword these days, but obviously the human phenomenon of fake news has existed pretty much ever since humans learned how to lie. The term fake news was first used, at least in recorded history, in the late 19th century, around 1890, when news started getting competitive and started to be sensational. Stories became sensationalized. But we must remember, fake news doesn't necessarily mean that the information itself is fake, but that it is unverified. The other reading you have for the week draws a very subtle kind of distinction between disinformation and propaganda. So conspiracy theories are an example of fake news, right? And it would seem as though the way to distinguish between fake and real news is only by trusting established structures. So those communities that we're talking about are part of the structures. This also tells us what we mean when we say the news media should remain independent. So that independent means that the media is expected to take a view outside of these controversies and completely detach itself from these structures as well as the conspiracy theories. Does that happen? That's a question. That's kind of a moot question. So from, it's just an apple, to these glitzy buildings and touristy places in our cities are all you need to know about our country. These kinds of claims contribute to fake news. Some fake news items may not mean much. Some may have deeper consequences. And in many of these new claims, especially at bigger levels, aesthetics plays a big part. Right? We may think of aesthetics as art and high culture, but not knowing what lies behind aesthetics is that deeper consequence that we were talking about. Does ugliness lie behind beauty? And can we see it or not? What happens if a democratically elected government is only concerned with its own political survival? It can then take shelter in aesthetics. like what you can't see can't hurt you. So just focus on what you can see, and we will show you what you can see. It's a play on the dualism of our whole existence and our constant quest to understand that one objective truth. We're always aiming to understand that as though there is that one truth that we must pursue. So that Nozick story that we were talking about, the two boxes, is really an allegory. It leads us to that ultimate question. How do we know what we know? And that single question should be at the heart of all pursuit of media literacy. If you can answer that question to your complete satisfaction, proving the absurdity of the other alternative, then you can legitimately claim to know the truth. However, the problem lies right there. Can we go that deep? Do we care that much? Do we have that kind of time and resources? And do we realize the consequences of our choices? And if the answer to any one of these is no, then we have to return to the comfort of trust. However, it is this awareness of our limits, that of how we can know and how much we can know, that we can call our limits of media literacy. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoy this week of fake news, because it's all over the place, and we hear that word, that term almost every day. So it's good to go a little deeper and understand the contradictions that surround fake news. Have a good one.